Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we continue with the tafsir of Surah Nisa, ayah number 32, inshallah, today. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا اكْتَسَبْنَ وَاسْأَلُوا اللَّهَ مِن فَضْلِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and do not crave what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given some of you over others. Men will be rewarded according to their deeds, and women equally according to theirs. Rather ask Allah for His bounties, from His bounties. Surely Allah has perfect knowledge of all things. So this ayah 32 is connected with ayah number 29, because it says the wow here, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا, and do not. The and means is connected to a previous ayah. The previous ayah that is connected to is 29, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O believers, do not devour one another's wealth illegally, but rather trade by mutual consent, and do not kill each other or yourselves. Surely Allah is ever merciful to you. What is the relevance of ayah number 29 and 32 being joined? The relevance is that tamanni, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا, the word is tamanni, which is to desire something, hope for something, wishful thinking. All of these words can explain what tamanni is. The relation is that the thing that creates a love, something like hopeful desire, wish, desire, you want that thing. You see somebody who's got a beautiful house, you want that thing. Somebody who's got a fancy car, sports car, very expensive, powerful, you want that thing. When you do desire something or you wish for something, it creates what? A love for that object in your heart, right? What then happens? Some people just leave it at that. They think, I wish I could have that. Nothing happens. But for other people, and it doesn't have to be a house or a car, it could be many things that other people have, they possess. But that can turn into a deep desire in the heart, a deep love in the heart, which if you don't achieve that object, you don't acquire that object, it can turn into an obsession, which can lead you to trying to acquire that thing by any means necessary. Illegally, legally, whatever, deception, fraud, stealing, doing injustice, oppressing someone, just to achieve that thing because you want it so badly. You want to have that favor or blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to someone else. So in ayah 29, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? He says, do not devour one another's wealth illegally, but rather trade by mutual consent, and do not kill each other or yourselves. So the tamanni results at the end, if it's not checked, this desire, this covetousness over other people's favors and blessings and wealth and whatever it is, objects of desire, if it's not checked, if it's let loose and you follow your whims and desires, it can end up oppressing somebody, cheating somebody, taking their wealth by force, even killing somebody. If you look at most situations where these type of things happen, it starts off with tamanni. It starts off with desiring something that somebody else has. So therefore it's connected with this ayah, and this ayah 32, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to explain why we shouldn't desire what other people have, and what type of, when is it allowed to desire something that somebody else has. Not all of it is haram or prohibited or unlawful. Sometimes it's okay, as we shall see inshallah in the examples. So this ayah 32 explains the root cause of 29 and explains the dimensions and the reality of desiring things wishing that you had things that belong to others, etc. Here in this ayah, it's a general universal principle. This tamanni, not to desire, not to hope and wish for what others have. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed others with. And the whole ayah, if you like, it's a general principle, a universal maxim, a wisdom, right? They say it's from the Jawami' al-Kalim of the Qur'an, meaning it's a super condensed expression within just a few words. And you'll see why as we unpack the ayah, inshallah. It just packs in so much meaning in a few words, so much wisdom, so much maslahah, benefit for societies, communities and individuals, right? It's just this first line, literally 7-8 words. وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. So in a way, it's also a concluding remark to the previous ayah 29, and also the other ayahs where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, to treat the orphans fairly, don't take from their wealth, to give the mahr, the just dowry that you've promised in contract, not to take from it. So it's all about not taking other people's wealth, giving people their right, their due, whatever their due, right? So this ayah is like a concluding remark on the previous ayahs. So this tamanni, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, it leads to hasad, jealousy, right? As I mentioned, it's one of the greatest means that lead on to crimes. The first crime on earth was due to what? Hasad, jealousy between the sons of Adam alayhi salam. One of their sacrifice was accepted, the other one's sacrifice was not accepted. One got jealous over the other. Jealousy, hasad, this is the wish, desire, leads to hasad. The tamanni leads to hasad. He wished that his sacrifice was accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instead of his brothers. That leads to jealousy. That led to a fight. That led to murder. The first murder in human history. And before that, that was preceded by the hasad of shaitan for Adam alayhi salam. The position Adam alayhi salam had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, shaitan couldn't bear it. He was jealous of Adam alayhi salam. Why should I bow to him? I'm better than him. He had arrogance, of course, but there's also a jealousy there. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making all the angels bow to him. Why? This jealousy leads to his rebellion and his open manifestation of his kufr against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this tamanni starts off with something very natural, small, insignificant, but if it's unchecked, if you don't know where it can lead to, and if you don't know the types of desires and tamanni, which types are okay, which types are not, then it could lead to devastating consequences. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns of this. And if you look at history, it's littered full of crimes due to wishing, desiring, coveting what others have. Whether it's individual to individual, groups to groups, communities to communities, nations to nations, which leads to pillaging, murder, fraud, propaganda, wars, oppression and so forth. So you can see why this is such an important maxim and wisdom. The tamanni here that's referred to in this ayah appears to be related to wishing or desiring the wealth of others because of the previous ayahs in Surah Nisa, because it mainly talks about taking care of the wealth of the orphans, the wealth that's inherited, making sure you give people their due rights, the wealth that you promised when you get married in the contract, the mahr that you owe the wife, etc., etc. So it appears to be related to those things specifically, but it's also very general because they all come under this ayah, this beginning of the ayah, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. There are many hadith that talk about why this ayah was revealed. When was it revealed? Occasion of revelation. There's different hadith, not many of them are authentic. Some of them are mursal, they're broken in the chain, or they're not very strong, they're weak, or perhaps reach up to Hasan, they say some of them, but there's a few different narrations. One is that this ayah was revealed because the women commenting at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they saw that the men were going to jihad, and the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the rewards of jihad, and the Qur'an mentions the reward of jihad, and they saw that women were not commanded to go, women were not participating, yes, in a very small role, few of them perhaps just as nurses type of thing, helping the wounded, carrying things, food, etc., but not participating in the battle except for a handful, one or two like that. So some women commenting that their reward, the men's reward is so great, we're deprived of this, right? Other narrations say some women question the inheritance shares, that they get half of the men. Other narrations say that women's witnesses, 2 witnesses equal 1 man's witness. It's not unfair, but it's unequal, right? And some women asking if their deeds are equal to men, because some men are saying they will get more reward, etc. So there's these kind of different narrations, right? And this is some of the criticism that even today non-Muslims, atheists, etc., try to level at Islam. How comes in inheritance you're unjust, you're not equal? It's between men and women, etc., etc. Men and women, you've got very different roles for men and women. You don't give them equality, right? So these are the same accusations, but the difference is, asking these questions. If a sister asks these questions today, what will she be labeled as? Probably feminist. She's a feminist activist, right? But no, you can ask these questions to know, to understand. It doesn't make you a feminist, because these are sahabiyat who are asking or discussing or wanting to know. Why did they want to know? To maximize their rewards. Their concern was the hereafter. It wasn't to know because of some ideology or some sense of, oh, this Sharia is unfair, or I'm going to not accept the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unless it's changed. No, they were genuinely, sincerely concerned about the reward in the hereafter. That's all. These were genuine questions. It doesn't make you a feminist. It doesn't make you somebody outside of the deen or questioning the deen. That's the difference. But obviously, some people put these same questions on the backdrop or because of an ideology they already have. They already think Islam is problematic. They already think Sharia is outdated, it's unfair, it's unjust. So then they ask these questions to try and prove their point. That's the difference between today and previous. So in terms of the types of tamanni, the types of wishful thinking or wishing that you had something that you don't have, or you had something that belongs to somebody else, there's several types. Some of them are haram, some of them are permissible, right? There's several types. Not all tamanni is haram. So the first type is to desire something which does not belong to anybody. It's not an object. It doesn't belong to anybody. And on top of that, Sharia doesn't forbid it, neither does culture or custom. This type is permissible. For example, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Laytana nara ikhwanana." I wish that we would have seen our brothers. He said that in front of the companions, the Sahaba. And they asked, who is he referring to? They were surprised that there could be others that the Prophet ﷺ wanted to see, and whilst his companions are in front of them. So he explained, I'm talking about those who will come after you and believe in me without having met me. So he says, laytana, would that, I wish that, So this is fine. It's not an object or wealth or something belonging to somebody. Secondly, it's not forbidden in Sharia to wish that. Yeah, you could wish I met the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is a tamanni which is impossible in the dunya, but it's not haram to have that feeling in your heart and that desire. So this type is not problematic, and based on this, Imam Bukhari in his Sahih he titled a chapter Babu Tamanni Shahada fi Sabilillah wa Babu al-Ightibat fi al-Ilmi wal Hikmah. Imam Bukhari titled his chapter the chapter of wishing for or desiring shahada, martyrdom in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the chapter of ightibat is like coveting or wanting knowledge and hikmah, knowledge and wisdom. And then he mentions the hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said that there is no hasad, la hasada illa fi ithnatayn. There's no hasad except for in two things. A man, رجل آتاه الله مالا فسلطه على حلكته في الحق. A man who is given wealth, right? And he's just focused on, determined to just spend it, all of it in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah? Fil haq, for the sake of truth, meaning for the sake of Islam, for the sake of establishing the deen, for the sake of supporting the ummah, etc., etc. And another man who's given, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him hikmah, knowledge, ilm, wisdom, and he judges by it, he judges others by it, and also he teaches people this wisdom, this knowledge. So a man who's wealthy gives fi sabilillah. A man who's knowledgeable or has wisdom, he judges with that knowledge, with that wisdom, and he teaches others. So the Prophet says, I'm saying there's no hasad here. There's two meanings. One is that's not really hasad. The other meaning is that there's no, these are the two things which people want the most. There's no real hasad except for in two things. But these two are both permissible. Obviously, they're both permissible because you can want that wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave that person with the intention that you'd want to spend it fi sabilillah in the same way. You can want that knowledge or wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave someone with the good intention that I will also teach people, I will also judge people with the truth and justice, etc. So this first type of tamanni is fine. The second type is to wish for something which is not possible to achieve due to a sharia prohibition or due to a customary prohibition. Like it's not the done thing in the culture or the customs without necessarily being prohibited by sharia. Like Salama was reported to have wanted women to fight in battle as men do for the reward, e.g. wanting women to have the same share as men, have the same role as men in battle, in jihad. So this is prohibited by Sharia. You can't have exactly the same role. Prophet ﷺ didn't command the women to have the same role in battle or generally the same role in everything. Many things, yes, it's the same role, but certain things, the Sharia separates, differentiates, gives distinct roles to men and women in certain things. Another prohibition is, for example, if somebody wanted women to have the same share as men, exactly the same. This is also prohibited in Sharia, except for in one or two cases in inheritance. So this type, it's not allowed due to Sharia. Obviously, you shouldn't want that. That's not something you should desire or wish for. The third type is similar to the second type, but it's less in category. This is to wish for something that may indicate displeasure with the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the ahkam. It's not that you want everything the same, but you want it, and perhaps inside you, you say, I wish it was like this, not like that. So in a way, there's some kind of subtle displeasure, not being content, satisfied with some kind of ruling of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some kind of genuine ruling of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember that there's a difference between sometimes the fiqh or fatwa of a scholar and the actual authentic or true ruling of Sharia. Sometimes scholars can get it wrong. Sometimes they can misapply a ruling onto somewhere where it doesn't fit. So sometimes it's based on weak evidence. So there's nothing wrong if you don't feel comfortable with that, because it's genuine, it's wrong. But we're talking about those things which are established by Sharia with clear evidence, and it's clear. There's no mistake in it. So this second and third, both are, the second one's forbidden, so is the third. Both are forbidden, because it either shows displeasure with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, subtle displeasure with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ahkam, rulings, laws, or it shows a open kind of displeasure with Allah's laws. The fourth one is to wish for something that someone else has, but but without wanting that person to lose what he has. Right? This is the fourth one, to wish for something that someone else has, but without wanting that person to lose what he has. E.g., the example I mentioned, the knowledge of a scholar or the wealth of a rich person. This is permissible, this is fine, as long as you don't want his or her wealth or knowledge to be affected or destroyed. The fifth one is to wish for something that someone else has, but it is not possible to have it without the other person being deprived of it. It's not possible to have without the other person being deprived of it. The example is, for example, in a particular country, there can only be one prime minister or one president or one ruler, one king. So there's already a king or a president or prime minister. You can't have that without depriving the current person in charge, right? You have to remove him, or he has to be removed, or she has to be removed. You can't have that without depriving the other person. In this case, it's allowed to wish for that, right? If it's intended with sincerity, you want to do it for the sake of Allah, as long as it's done without wanting that person to die early. So if you say, I wish he dies tomorrow so I can become president, this is not allowed. Or I wish or it's something else. Some people want other people's possession or something which they can't get without the person dying. Even inheritance, some people do that. They want the person to die so they can inherit that person. Or they might have taken some kind of life insurance or whatever, which is problematic anyway in the first place. But they might wish for that person to die so they inherit, or they can claim the money. So this type, you can wish for that position without wishing for the early death of that person. As long as it's done, as long as that thing is halal in Islam and is done sincerely for the sake of Islam. The last one is to wish for the destruction of a blessing that someone else has without wanting it for yourself. You just want the other person not to have it, but you don't want it for yourself. Who can think of an example? This type is generally not allowed. You can't wish for somebody else's blessing, favor, position or wealth, whatever they have, to be destroyed without you wanting it. If you want it, that's even worse. But you can't wish for it to be destroyed, except, they made an exception, unless that thing or the person with what they have of favor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and wealth or power, unless they are harming the deen or the ummah. So if they are harming the deen or this ummah, oppressing them unlawfully, unjustly, due to the favors that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them, like power, economic power, military power, whatever it is, then you can wish for the destruction of that favor, of that power, of that thing that they're misusing. Then it's fine. So these are the 6 types of tamanni one can have. As you can see, 1 and 4 is permissible. The others are problematic, more or less, unless, with some exceptions. So then the scholars discuss this ayah where the nahi is وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. So this وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا, this is nahi, is prohibition, is a command not to do something. So they said, is this for tahreem, meaning is this for direct haram? Does it mean if you have that tamanni is haram? Or is it tahreem tanzihi, they say, or the Hanafis would call it makruh tanzihi? Is it like not clearly haram but is disliked? It's disliked. It's not clearly haram but it's disliked. So they discussed that. They said, some people said it's that makruh, strong, it's not, shouldn't be done, is disliked. Others said it's haram. The more stronger opinion or stronger position is that it's haram in those cases I mentioned where it's clearly haram. Those cases I mentioned where it's very clearly haram, it's haram in those cases. Other cases where I said there's an exception or it's not that good, it could be makruh, and other cases it's clearly permissible. So there is a breakdown. It's not just one command here. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. Like, do not desire those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored, some over others, some of you over others. Who are these some of you? بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. Who are these people Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about? There's 2 possibilities, because later on in the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about men and women in the same ayah. So one possibility is Allah is talking about بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ, means men over women. Do not desire, do not wish for those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored men with over women. Right? That's one explanation. Another explanation is generic, is for all people. So it could be just general. Do not desire those favors or blessings which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given one of you over another, whether it's man or woman. Right? So it's generic. They said both of these are possibilities in terms of interpretation or explanation. Both apply as well. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues in this ayah. He says, لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا اكْتَسَبُوا وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا اكْتَسَبْنَ. Al-iktisab here, the word used, like for men, they shall have, the way it's translated, men will be rewarded according to their deeds and women according to theirs. That's how it's translated. Iktisab, the word iktisab here has been translated as rewarded according to their deeds, meaning iktisab has been translated as deeds, as amal. Iktisab linguistically means to earn something through effort, to earn something through effort. But it's come to not be known or widely used as anything that you acquire, whether it's through effort or not, it's still iktisab. It comes to you through effort or not, it's still iktisab. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, in the first interpretation, if you interpret it as men will be rewarded according to their deeds and women will be rewarded according to theirs, if you interpret it in this way, which is possible, it means that there's no need to wish, women should not wish for the duties and deeds of men, because you will both be fully rewarded according to your deeds that were allocated. As the Prophet ﷺ said when discussing this topic, he's reported to have said to women that your jihad is a hajj that is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hajj mabrur. I haven't checked the authenticity for this, so that's why I said it's reported to have said, because tafsir has a lot of hadith without proper reference, or you have to go and check it. I didn't have time to check this. But it's reported to have said. So this is one of the meaning, that there's no need for women to want to have the same obligations, roles, duties in Islam, where it apparently seems as though men will get more reward. No, you don't need to wish for that, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you accordingly, fully, equally. You're not going to lose out. There's no need to wish for each other's rewards or actions. Another interpretation is men have a right to what they have earned, like iktisab is what they have earned or inherited. Meaning they have a right to what they have earned and inherited. Women have a right to what they have earned or inherited. There's no contradiction, because it's a part of not wanting what others have. So here, because the previous ayahs talked about inheritance and rights, so men have a right to what they have earned, meaning if they go out and work and earn money, if they inherit double share compared to a woman, etc., then they have a right to that. So no need to desire what the other has due to a ruling that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has laid down, right? And do not try to acquire this through illegal means by changing, defrauding somebody, or by changing the rules of inheritance. Do not do this. Do not desire that. So these are the two interpretations here. And like I said, it can be applied one over another. Individuals over another. Men, women, men over men, women over women. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also within the men, He's favored some over others. With knowledge, with wealth, with position, with skills, abilities, intellectual capabilities, so many different things. With health. So it applies equally amongst men, equally amongst women, one to another, and across men and women. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاسْأَلُوا اللَّهَ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ. Rather ask Allah for His bounties. Do not desire what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given others, whether that's women, whether that's another person or another group, but rather ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His bounties. Yeah? So then if we go back to this two types of interpretation or understanding, if we keep the division of men and women separate, then it means women should ask Allah to give you the same reward or more than men. Just like the Prophet ﷺ said, your hajj is your jihad. So ask Allah, give me the same reward as jihad or more for my hajj. Or ask Allah, give me more reward in this. If you feel that in you, that you might be getting less reward, ask Allah to give you from His bounty equal or more reward for an act which is easier or apparently less than what the men are doing. This is what you should do. If we keep the meaning general, meaning applies to everybody, then it means don't desire what belongs to others, but ask Allah to also grant you from His favor and bounties, because His favors are limitless. Just because He's given 100 people this amount of wealth, this amount of knowledge, this amount of health, position, doesn't mean there's a shortage in the treasury of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No. He can give the same and more to every single person on this earth. So why not ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, instead of feeling jealousy, instead of wanting the other person's fame or possessions or wealth or whatever, authority to be destroyed, and you feeling jealous, why not ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you the same if it's halal? So this is what it means. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you more, equal or more, without destroying, of course, without destroying or taking away anything from the other person. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمًا. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes this ayah by saying, surely Allah has perfect knowledge of all things. Perfect knowledge of all things. Why did He say He has perfect knowledge of all things? إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمًا. He knows all things. It's because the ayah is appropriate for this ayah, because the ayah began with what? Tamanni. Right? Tamanni is what? A desire, a hope, a wish. Who can know that desire? Who can know that tamanni? Only yourself. Nobody else can know what you're desiring. Nobody else can know what I'm wishing for. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. That's number one. So if you're hiding that desire, that wishful thinking, that covetousness, that hasad in your heart, then Allah knows this, so be aware. He knows what you desire. He knows what you want. But if it's something good, like emulating somebody who's very charitable, who's wealthy and charitable, somebody who's knowledgeable and teaching and judging others with justice, then also that's a good thing, and Allah knows that you will be rewarded for that, and perhaps your du'as will be answered. So in both cases, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمًا. And also, generally, He knows who to give what from His favors, who deserves what. For what purpose is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving these favors to this person and not that person, this group and that group? Why did He give women half a share? Why did He give men double share? Allah knows in His perfect wisdom. He knows what's best in His perfect knowledge. Inheritance is an easy one to explain. We've explained it before many times. Inheritance is not something in isolation. It's connected to a system of rights and responsibilities. Men have more responsibilities over their families, over their brothers, parents, daughters, sons, etc. And therefore, they have more in inheritance. They inherit more. Women don't have that responsibility. In fact, they have more rights. Their brother has to take care of them. Their father has to take care of them. Yeah, their son has to take care of them, etc., etc. So it's a system of rights and responsibilities, and it's very just in that way. So that's just one, but Allah knows, even if you can't explain it, why did these people who are disbelievers, they've got so much? Why? What's the wisdom behind that? We don't know, but we know Allah is perfect in His judgment, in His justice, in His wisdom and knowledge. So we trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna Allah kana ala kulli shay'in alima. We don't know, Allah knows. And one of the things, this tamanni is related to always what other people have, right? Especially the ones that are prohibited, is related to what other people have. But one thing we have to remember, when you see other people who have more wealth, more power, more position, more fame, more abilities, more blessings, never ever think that this is always a good thing for them. The Qur'an tells us the opposite. The Qur'an says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tests people with good and evil. He tests people with prosperity, wealth, fame, authority, power, health. That is also a test. And He tests people with poverty, with illness, with despair, etc., with losses. Both of them, in reality, both of them are tests. Maybe one is easier than the other, but they're both big tests that could end up destroying you if you don't know why it's come, if you don't know the nature of reality of these things. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-A'raf, He talks about how He destroyed all the towns that rejected the messengers, that whenever He sent a messenger, they rejected him. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed that town. But then He says He replaced those people. ثُمَّ بَدَّلْنَا مَكَانَ السَّيِّئَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ حتى عفوا وقالوا قد مس آباءنا الضراء والسراء فأخذناهم بغتة وهم لا يشعرون. Then we changed in Surah Araf, ayah number 95, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, then we changed their adversity to prosperity. These are people who don't believe, they rejected the messengers, or it's their next generations. Until they flourished and argued, they became wealthy, powerful in the land, and they argued falsely. Our forefathers too had been visited by adversity and prosperity. Their forefathers who were destroyed. They said this prosperity is nothing to do with God. Our forefathers had that. They had good times and bad times. It's nothing to do with God's favor. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says what? So we seized them by surprise while they were unaware. So sometimes wealth, power, luxury, being in a good place in the dunya can be a huge test for people, especially if they are distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially if they're heedless, in ghafla, or in some kind of rebellion against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's called istidraj. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them more rope to hang themselves with. So never ever think when you see others, especially those who are, you think they're distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or openly they're doing things against the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, never ever think that they are blessed. No, as Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah said, that every ni'mah that takes you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a ni'mah, it calls a nikmah, it's a disaster. And every ni'mah that brings you, or every disaster, or every trial that brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a ni'mah, is a blessing, is a favor. So Muslims are given this amazing guidance so that we can see truth, reality as it is, not as it appears. We can understand what's behind what we see. The last few words, and then we'll stop here inshallah, just to reflect on this. Ibn Ashur, one of the last great mufassirun, more recent, not this century, probably 150 years ago or something like that. He says this ayah also goes against, or less than that actually. He says this ayah goes against communism, Marxism. How? Because their ideology is based on what? Flattening all individual wealth, property, belongings. Everyone, give your wealth, property, everything belongs to the state. Everyone's equal in the name of equality, brotherhood. Everyone's equal, right? And the state will look after you. Ibn Ashur said this ayah goes against that, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He has favored some of you above others. So in life there will always be difference. There will always be hierarchy. There will always be some who are favored more than others. So you can't establish a system, or that type of system goes against the Islamic teachings where everyone's the same and someone centrally distributes the wealth. No, this goes against the natural order of things. Right? This is not how things work. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given different people different capabilities, abilities, business sense, earning, rizq, all of that is different. Even amongst the prophets, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have favored some over others. We have favored some prophets over other prophets. So what about human beings, normal human beings who are not prophets? So in Islam, the solution is not to flatten everything out, is to have a circular economy, which it means that the rich, the wealthy, they redistribute their wealth, some of their wealth, to the more needy, the less fortunate, through fard zakah, one means, and through very encouraged and recommended charity, sadaqah, charity, voluntary charity. So this is how it works in Islam. It's not forced, everyone become equal, no. You look after each other, and through all the other rights and responsibilities that families have, individuals have, fathers have, brothers have, etc. So there's a system in Islam which respects individual right to own property, to become wealthy, which respects the favors and bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored some over the others, but it also takes care of those less fortunate, those who are poor, those who are needy, those who need support from society. And lastly, you can see, in today's culture, these gender wars that are taking place. This, especially this leftist kind of woke movement. I mean, the starting point may have been sincere or something, or they have some genuine points about equality, etc. But if you look at the gender wars, the whole thing is about just fighting over each other. Men are all evil or women are all evil. Men are the cause of all misery, of all injustice to women, and vice versa. It's just, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah has favored some over others. Allah has favored some over others in certain roles, in certain responsibilities, in certain wealth, ability, strength, etc. This is just a fact. If we abide by that, accept that, and surrender to that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says men and women are caretakers and supporters of each other. They're not enemies to one another. And this applies to all groups as well, the weak and the poor amongst the classes, etc. And unfortunately, as believers, for us in the West, we have to be much more mindful of this prohibition of wanting and desiring too much what other people have. Because all advertising, music, films, it's just full of this. Reality TV, just going to people who are making money, going to their houses, see the luxury life they're living, right? People just watching day in, day out box sets, just watching the rich and famous. To create that tamanni in your heart, you want the same thing. And then people go out and rob other people and mug other people to achieve the same designer goods and things like that. So our society is full of these kind of messaging, especially in our culture. Entertainment culture is there. So we need to be really aware of that and understand the reality behind it and take the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to understand His ayat and practice them in our lives, inshallah. We'll stop here today.